The dust never settled on Xylos. It clung to everything: clothing, skin, machinery, and memories. Kalen, or Kale as the few who bothered to speak to him called him, had long ago given up the futile attempt to keep it at bay. In his cluttered repair shop at the edge of the mining station, the fine particles danced in the shafts of artificial light that penetrated the grimy windows, a constant reminder of the desolation that surrounded him. Kale wiped his brow, leaving a streak of dark grease mingling with the omnipresent dust. His fingers worked methodically on the broken coolant regulator, a task so familiar he could perform it in his sleep. These days, sleep was his enemy, bringing back vivid dreams of lives extinguished, of laughter silenced, of a family that no longer existed. It was easier to work until exhaustion claimed him, granting a few precious hours of dreamless oblivion. At 38, Kale looked a decade older. His once vibrant eyes had faded to a dull gray that matched the perpetual haze outside. Scars crisscrossed his calloused hands, badges of a lifetime spent taming unruly machinery. But the deepest scars remained invisible, etched into his soul 4 years ago when the prototype mining drone he'd helped design malfunctioned catastrophically during a demonstration, taking his wife Nara and their daughter Mila with it. The official report called it an unfortunate accident due to unforeseen system integration failures. Kale called it what it was: murder by corporate negligence, by cutting corners, by ignoring his safety concerns. Omnicorp had paid handsomely for his silence. Not that he'd wanted their blood money. But in the lawless expanse of space's frontier stations like Xylos, justice was as rare as fresh air. So he'd retreated here, to this forgotten corner of an already forgotten mining outpost, fixing broken machinery and keeping human interaction to the bare minimum required for survival. The locals had learned to leave him alone, to drop off their malfunctioning equipment outside his door, pay his fair but non-negotiable rates, and collect their repaired items without unnecessary conversation. This solitary existence suited Kale just fine. Or so he told himself as he finished the regulator repair and moved on to the next item on his workbench, a simple communications device with a corrupted signal processor. The dull buzz of his perimeter alarm pulled his attention away from his work. Probably another customer dropping off a repair job. Kale glanced at the small monitor beside his workbench. The grainy black and white surveillance feed showed the usual chaotic bustle of the mining station's main thoroughfare at the far end of the alley where his shop stood. But something was different today. A small figure darted between the crowds, constantly looking over her shoulder. A child, a rare sight on Xylos, where few miners brought families to this harsh existence. And she was being pursued. 3 men moved through the crowd with predatory efficiency, their intentions as clear as their non-regulation weapons. The child, a girl, Kale realized was clutching something to her chest, a small stuffed toy perhaps. She looked terrified. Kale's hand hovered over the screen. Not your problem, a voice in his head insisted. You help, you get involved, you suffer. He'd learned that lesson in the most painful way possible. But as the girl ducked into the alley leading to his shop, Kale found himself moving toward the reinforced door. Some long-dormant instinct overrode the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Maybe it was her age. She couldn't be much older than Mila had been. Maybe it was something in her desperate flight. Or maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as dead inside as he'd believed. The door hissed open just as the girl stumbled past. She froze, wide-eyed, like a cornered animal. Behind her, the 3 men slowed their pursuit, now more cautious as they assessed the new variable in their equation. Inside, Kale said, his voice rough from disuse. When the child hesitated, he added in a softer tone, "They won't follow." Her eyes, startlingly violet in a face smudged with Xylos's ubiquitous dust, darted from him to her pursuers and back. Making a decision, she darted past him into the relative safety of his shop. Kale stepped outside, filling the doorway with his solid frame. Years of hauling machinery parts had kept him strong despite his self-imposed isolation. He fixed his gaze on the approaching men. "Lost something?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. The leader of the trio, a wiry man with augmented eyes that glowed an unnatural green, offered an insincere smile. Just looking for a little girl who wandered away from her guardians. We're here to take her home. No children pass this way, Cale replied evenly. His right hand casually drifted to his belt, where a heavy impact wrench hung. Not technically a weapon, but it would shatter bones effectively enough. The leader's smile faltered. Look, mechanic, this doesn't concern you. The girl has something that belongs to our employer. Hand her over, and we can all get back to our business. Like I said, Cale repeated, no children here. Just machines. His fingers closed around the impact wrench. Now, I've got work to do. The three men exchanged glances, silently calculating whether the prize was worth the risk. Cale knew what they saw. A scarred, solitary mechanic defending his territory. What they couldn't know was how little he had left to lose. After a tense moment, the leader stepped back. Another time, then. But watch yourself, mechanic. Xylos is a dangerous place for those who stick their noses where they don't belong. Cale watched impassively as they retreated, melting back into the chaotic flow of miners, traders, and drifters that populated the station. Only when they were truly gone did he step back inside, securing the heavy door behind him. The girl stood exactly where he'd last seen her, clutching not a toy as he'd thought, but a small blue metallic cube. Her clothing, simple but well-made, suggested she wasn't from the mining families. Her eyes, still wide with fear, tracked his every movement. They're gone, Cale said, returning the impact wrench to his belt. For now, the child nodded but remained silent, watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. You hungry? He asked, moving toward the small kitchen alcove at the back of his shop. Without waiting for an answer, he pulled out a ration bar and a pouch of filtered water. Not exactly a welcoming feast, but it was the best he had to offer. The girl approached cautiously, accepting the offerings with a small nod of thanks. She ate with the focused efficiency of someone accustomed to taking sustenance when available, regardless of taste or quality. Cale busied himself at his workbench, pretending to focus on the communications device while surreptitiously observing his unexpected guest. Up close, her unusual coloring was even more apparent. Violet eyes and hair, so pale it was almost silver despite her warm brown skin. Not standard genetic combinations, which meant either expensive cosmetic modifications, unlikely for a child, or specialized engineering. Neither option explained what she was doing alone on a backwater mining station like Xylos. What's your name? He finally asked, when the silence had stretched uncomfortably long. The girl hesitated, then in a voice barely above a whisper replied, Lyra. Where are your parents, Lyra? Her small fingers tightened around the blue cube. Mother is working. She told me to hide if anything happened. And those men, why were they chasing you? Lyra's eyes dropped to the cube in her hands. They want this. And me. A small tremor ran through her slender frame. Are you going to give me to them? Something in her voice, in the resigned way she asked the question, stirred anger in Cale's chest. What kind of life had this child known to expect betrayal so readily? No, he said firmly, but you can't stay here forever. Is there somewhere safe you can go? Someone who can help you find your mother? Lyra shook her head. Mother said if we got separated, I should find somewhere to hide until she came for me. Cale ran a hand through his unkempt hair, leaving another streak of grease. This was exactly the kind of complication he'd structured his entire existence to avoid. Every instinct told him to escort the girl to the station's security office and wash his hands of matter. But security on Xylos was notoriously corrupt, easily bought by the highest bidder. And something about those men, their confidence, their augmentations, suggested resources beyond the average thug. If he handed Lyra over to station security, he might as well deliver her directly to her pursuers. All right, he sighed, already regretting the decision forming in his mind. You can stay here until your mother finds you, but only for a short while, understand? This isn't a place for children. Relief flooded the girl's face, and for a moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a frightened child finding a moment's sanctuary. Thank you, sir. Cale, he corrected automatically. Just Kale. Lyra nodded solemnly. Thank you, just Kale. A rusty sound emerged from his throat, startling them both. It took Kale a moment to recognize it as laughter, a long-forgotten reflex he'd thought extinguished years ago. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the unexpected emotion. You can rest on that cot in the corner. I've got work to finish. As he returned to the communications device, Kale tried to ignore the warmth that had somehow penetrated the cold emptiness he'd cultivated for so long. It was temporary, he assured himself. The girl would find her mother, they would leave, and he would return to his solitary existence. By the time Kale had finished his repairs for the day, Lyra had fallen asleep on the cot. The mysterious blue cube still clutched tightly in her small hands. He covered her with a threadbare blanket, careful not to wake her, and retreated to his own Spartan sleeping quarters adjacent to the main workshop. That night, for the first time in years, Kale dreamt not of the accident that had taken his family, but of violet eyes and a small voice asking for sanctuary. When morning came, or what passed for morning on a space station with no natural day-night cycle, Kale found Lyra already awake, examining his collection of broken gadgets with curious intensity. "Did you make all these?" she asked, pointing to a shelf of small mechanical animals, a hobby he'd once shared with Mila. "Yes," he replied, surprised she'd shown interest in the dusty creations. Most customers never even noticed them. "They're beautiful," Lyra said, her finger hovering over a delicate mechanical bird, like they could fly away any moment. Something constricted in Kale's chest. Those had been almost exactly Mila's words when he'd shown her the first creation. "Are you hungry?" he asked abruptly, unable to continue the conversation. Lyra nodded, withdrawing her hand from the shelf. "Yes, please." Breakfast was another ration bar, but Kale managed to find a packet of sweetened synthetic protein that almost tasted like fruit. Lyra's face lit up at this small kindness, and again Kale felt that unexpected warmth spreading through his chest. "Your mother," he began, as she finished eating. "Will she know to look for you here?" Lyra's expression grew solemn again. "Mother always finds me. She has ways." Before Kale could question her further, the shop's communication panel buzzed. A customer with an emergency repair. Routine returned, and for most of the day, he worked while Lyra quietly observed or amused herself with simple puzzles Kale found in a forgotten storage container. It was strange having another presence in his space after so long alone, but not as intrusive as he'd feared. Lyra seemed to understand his need for quiet concentration, only speaking when spoken to, her questions thoughtful and surprisingly insightful for a child her age. By the time evening approached, Kale had almost grown accustomed to her presence. He was just considering what to prepare for dinner when his security system chimed with an approaching visitor alert. "Stay back," he instructed Lyra, who immediately retreated to the cot in the corner, the blue cube once again clutched protectively against her chest. Kale approached the monitor, half expecting to see the three thugs return with reinforcements. Instead, a solitary woman stood at his door, tall, with the same unusual coloring as Lyra, though her hair was a deeper silver, almost metallic in the harsh station lighting. Her clothing was practical but well-made, and despite obvious exhaustion, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. Behind him, Lyra gasped, "Mother!" Before Kale could respond, the child had darted past him and was entering the entry code he'd never shown her. The door slid open, and Lyra flew into the woman's waiting arms. "Lyra!" The woman's voice cracked with emotion as she clutched her daughter tight. "My brave, clever girl. Are you hurt? Did they find you?" "I'm okay, Mother. Just Kale protected me." The woman looked up then, seeming to truly notice Kale for the first time. Her eyes, the same startling violet as her daughter's, widened slightly before narrowing in assessment. "You helped my daughter," she stated, her voice carefully neutral. Kale shrugged, uncomfortable under her piercing gaze. "Anyone would have." Her laugh held no humor. "On Xylos?" "No, sir, they would not have. Most would have sold her to the highest bidder without a second thought." She straightened, still holding Lyra close to her side. "I am Alara, and I owe you a debt I cannot easily repay." "No debt," Kale replied gruffly. "She needed help. That's all. Alara studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Nevertheless, you have my gratitude. She looked down at Lyra with obvious relief. We should go. It's not safe to linger. Kale found himself oddly reluctant to see them leave. Those men might still be looking for you. It's getting late. You could stay here tonight. Leave in the morning when there are more people about. Surprise flickered across Alara's features, quickly replaced by calculation. That would be kind, if you're certain we wouldn't impose. It's fine, Kale said, stepping back to allow them fully inside. As the door slid shut behind them, he added, I don't have much food, but what I have, you're welcome to share. That night passed in awkward, but not unpleasant company. Alara spoke little of herself or why they were being pursued, and Kale didn't press. He recognized the caution of someone used to measuring every word, keeping secrets close. It was a feeling he knew all too well. Lyra, safe in her mother's presence, bloomed like a rare flower, chattering about the mechanical animals and how Kale had fixed 3 different machines while she watched. Her animation transformed her from the frightened, silent child of the previous day into a bright, inquisitive being who seemed to illuminate the dreary workshop. When it was time to sleep, Kale offered his quarters to Alara and Lyra, intending to take the small cot in the workshop. But Alara shook her head. We've imposed enough. The cot is sufficient for both of us. Her tone brooked no argument, and Kale recognized the pride of someone unaccustomed to accepting charity. He nodded and retreated to his own space, lying awake long into the night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of others breathing in his sanctuary. It should have felt like an invasion. Instead, it felt strangely like remembering. Morning brought a renewed sense of tension. Alara was already awake when Kale emerged, her posture alert as she checked the security feeds with practiced efficiency. They're still out there, she said without preamble. 3 of them at the main junction, 2 more at the shuttle bay. They're being more careful now, less obvious, but I recognize the pattern. She turned to face him, her expression grave. We've put you in danger by coming here. Kale moved to the console, studying the feeds with his own experienced eye. She was right. The men from yesterday had returned with reinforcements, and they were strategically positioned to monitor major exit routes. Who are they, he asked. What do they want with the child? Alara's gaze flicked to Lyra, who was still sleeping on the cot. It's complicated. It always is, Kale replied dryly. A ghost of a smile touched Alara's lips. Indeed, she hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. They work for Omnicorp. Does that name mean anything to you? Kale's blood ran cold. Yes. Alara nodded, as if confirming his suspicion. I thought it might. Your reaction when Lyra mentioned my name, there was recognition there. I used to work for them, Kale admitted reluctantly. Until an accident. Not an accident, Alara corrected softly. They never are with Omnicorp. The implication hung between them, heavy with shared understanding. Kale found himself studying her more carefully. You work for them too. I was a geneticist in their bioengineering division, she confirmed. Until I discovered what they really wanted from our research. Understanding dawned. Lyra, Alara's expression tightened. She's special. Her genetic makeup includes modifications that Omnicorp believes could revolutionize human adaptation to deep space environments. Resistance to radiation, enhanced oxygen utilization, accelerated healing. Qualities that would make a perfect workforce for their most dangerous mining operations. Kale glanced at the sleeping child. She's a prototype. She's my daughter, Alara corrected sharply. Whatever they intended, whatever genetic modifications they approved in the embryonic stage, she is a child, not a product. When I realized they planned to treat her as corporate property, to study and eventually replicate her modifications in an entire generation of workers, I took her and ran. The pieces fell into place, and they've been hunting you ever since. Alara nodded. 5 years now. We've stayed ahead of them by constantly moving, using false identities, staying on remote outposts like Xylos where their corporate reach is limited. But each time, they eventually find us. And the blue cube? Insurance, Alara replied. Complete research data, encrypted proof of their illegal human experimentation program. enough to ruin them if it ever reached the right authorities. It's the only reason they haven't simply killed us. They need the data contained in that cube. Kale processed this information, his mind already calculating escape routes, resources, possibilities. It was a skill he'd thought long abandoned. This ability to see problems as puzzles with solutions rather than immovable obstacles. "I can help you get off station," he finally said. "I have contacts in the salvage crews. They don't ask questions about extra cargo." Relief flickered across Alara's face, but she shook her head. "We can't involve you further. You've already taken enough risk sheltering us for one night." "They saw me help Lyra," Kale pointed out. "I'm already involved." Before Alara could argue further, Lyra stirred on the cot, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Mother? Just Kale? What's wrong?" "Nothing, Starlight," Alara assured her, moving to smooth her daughter's tousled hair. "We're just planning our next journey." Lyra's perceptive gaze moved between the adults. "They found us again, didn't they?" "Yes," Alara admitted. "But we'll be all right. We always are." The resignation in Lyra's small nod struck Kale like a physical blow. No child should be so accustomed to danger, to running, to living in constant fear. "Actually," he heard himself saying, "I have another idea." Both Alara and Lyra looked at him expectantly. "Xylos has old mining laws, holdovers from when the first settlers established the station," Kale explained. "One of them involves family protection rights. Married couples receive certain privileges, dedicated family living quarters in the secure section, enhanced privacy protections, more difficult extradition procedures." Alara frowned. "That's helpful information, but we don't." "Marry me," Kale interrupted, surprising himself as much as her. "On paper, legally. A marriage of convenience that would grant you those protections immediately." Alara stared at him, speechless. "I know it sounds crazy," Kale continued, pressing ahead before his courage failed. "But think about it. As my legal wife, you'd fall under local protection statutes. Lyra would be recognized as my legal dependent. Omnicorp would need to navigate more bureaucracy to get to you, giving us time to plan a more permanent solution." "You would do that?" Alara asked softly. "For strangers?" Kale's gaze dropped to Lyra, who was watching the exchange with wide, hope-filled eyes. "Not for strangers," he said quietly. "For a little girl who deserves better than running for the rest of her life." Alara's composure cracked then, just for a moment. She sank to her knees before him, head bowed, her proud shoulders finally showing the weight they'd carried for so long. "Please," she whispered, a single word that seemed to contain years of exhaustion, fear, and desperate love for her child. "If you would do this for us, I have nothing to offer in return except my eternal gratitude." Kale, uncomfortable with her posture of supplication, gently urged her to rise. "No gratitude necessary. It's just paperwork." But as he looked into Alara's violet eyes, so like her daughter's yet shadowed by years of struggle, Kale knew it was far more than paperwork. It was a step back into a world of connection he'd sworn to abandon, a risk to the carefully constructed isolation that had been his shield against further pain. And yet, for the first time since losing his family, the thought of helping others didn't fill him with dread. Instead, there was a flicker of something he'd thought forever extinguished: purpose. "We should act quickly," he said, turning to his console to hide the unexpected emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Before they tightened their net, the civil registration office on Xylos was little more than a cramped alcove near the station's administrative sector, staffed by a single board official who processed everything from birth certificates to property disputes. The marriage ceremony, if it could even be called that, took less than 10 minutes, just enough time to scan identifications, record biometric confirmations, and update the station's population registry. Kale had provided Alara with a spare identity chip, one he'd kept as a contingency during his own flight from Omnicorp years ago. It wouldn't stand up to deep corporate scrutiny, but it was enough for Xylos's minimal verification systems. Lyra, standing solemnly between them during the brief ceremony, had slipped her small hand into Kale's as the registrar pronounced them legally bound. The simple gesture of trust nearly undid him. "Congratulations," the registrar droned, clearly having recited the words thousands of times before. By the authority of Xylo's station governance, you are now registered as a legal family unit, entitled to all associated protections and responsibilities. Please update your living arrangements within 7 standard days to comply with family zoning regulations. And just like that, Cale found himself with a wife and daughter, on paper at least. The next hours were a blur of activity. Using his new family status, Cale immediately filed for larger quarters in the station's more secure residential section. The automated system, recognizing the family classification, processed the request with surprising efficiency. By nightfall, they had relocated to a modest 2-room dwelling in a section of Xylos, where Omnicorp's influence was less pervasive due to competing corporate interests. It wasn't safety, not by any measure, but it bought them time. The new quarters were sparse but functional. A main living area with basic food preparation facilities and a separate sleeping chamber with privacy dividers. Everything spoke of utilitarian design, focused on maximizing limited space. But compared to Cale's workshop or the countless temporary shelters Alara and Lyra had endured, it was practically luxurious. A real shower, Alara murmured, examining the small hygiene unit with something approaching reverence. With actual water allotment, Lyra was already exploring every corner of what was to be their home, her natural childish curiosity momentarily overshadowing the wariness that had become her default state. "Look, Mother, a window!" she exclaimed, pressing her face against a small viewport that offered a glimpse of the starfield outside Xylos. "Can I count the stars before bed?" "Of course, starlight," Alara replied, her voice softening as it always did when addressing her daughter. "But not too long. It's been quite a day." As Lyra busied herself at the viewport, carefully counting stars in a ritual that seemed familiar to her, Alara turned to Cale. "I don't know how to thank you," she began. Cale shook his head. "No need. I've lived on Xylos long enough to know its rules and loopholes." This was the most practical solution. "Practical," Alara repeated, a hint of something unreadable in her tone. "Yes, I suppose it is. Still, you've upended your life for us. I want you to know I don't take that lightly." Cale shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "My life needed appending," he admitted. "Has for a long time." Understanding flickered in Alara's eyes. "Your family, what happened to them?" For a moment, Cale considered deflecting the question as he had countless times before. But something about this woman, perhaps the shared experience of loss and running, perhaps just the simple fact that they were now legally bound, made the old defenses seem pointless. "Omnicorp happened," he said quietly. "I was lead engineer on a new line of autonomous mining drones. Raised concerns about unstable control algorithms, but they pushed for demonstration anyway. System went catastrophic during the showcase. My wife Nara was there with our daughter Mila. They were too close to the blast zone." Alara closed her eyes briefly. "I'm so sorry, Cale." He nodded once in acknowledgement. Omnicorp buried the safety reports, classified it as an unforeseen technical failure. Paid me off to keep quiet. I took their money and disappeared. "To punish yourself," Alara observed softly, not a question, but a recognition. Cale didn't deny it. "Why did you come to Xylos?" "It's the last place I'd expect someone running from Omnicorp. Sometimes the best place to hide is right under their nose," Alara explained. "They control significant portions of Xylos. Yes, but their very ubiquity makes them less vigilant here. They expect runners to flee to distant, independent settlements, not to burrow deeper into their territory." She glanced toward Lyra, still absorbed in her star counting. "It was supposed to be a brief stopover while I arranged more permanent transport, but they caught our trail faster than expected. And now," Alara's expression hardened with determination. "Now we continue as we have, survive, stay ahead, keep Lyra safe until she's old enough to protect herself. Except," her voice softened almost imperceptibly, "except now we have you. A temporary advantage, but one I intend to use wisely." The matter-of-fact way she included him in her calculations should have bothered Cale. Instead, he found himself nodding in agreement. "We'll need supplies. Enhanced security for the quarters. Contingency plans. I have some savings, Alara offered, carefully distributed across anonymous accounts. Good. My repair business brings steady income. Between the two, we should manage. Cale found himself slipping into planning mode with surprising ease, as if the years of isolation had simply been a pause rather than an end to his former capabilities. Across the room, Lyra's counting grew slower, her small voice heavy with encroaching sleep. 57, 58. Alara moved to the child, gently guiding her away from the viewport. Time for rest, Starlight. The stars will still be there tomorrow. Promise? Lyra asked sleepily. Promise, Alara assured her, helping her to the sleeping area where she'd already prepared a small nest of bedding. Cale watched this tender interaction with a tightness in his chest that was both painful and strangely welcome. It had been so long since he'd witnessed such simple love. When Alara returned, Lyra, now sleeping peacefully, she found Cale already at work on the quarter security system, upgrading the basic lock with components he'd brought from his workshop. You should rest too, he said without looking up from his work. I'll take first watch. First watch, Alara repeated with a small, sad smile. The language of those always at war. Aren't we? Cale asked. She considered this, then nodded. I suppose we are. Very well, but wake me in 4 hours. You need rest as much as I do. Cale agreed, though he had no intention of waking her. From the shadows beneath her eyes, it was clear Alara hadn't had proper sleep in days, maybe weeks. He could manage one night. As Alara retreated to the sleeping area, Cale continued his security modifications, his mind more focused than it had been in years. There was something almost therapeutic about having a clear purpose again: protect, fortify, plan. Skills he'd once excelled at before grief had eroded his will. The next morning brought the first test of their hastily constructed arrangement. Cale needed to return to his workshop, to retrieve critical tools and components, as well as to maintain appearances. A sudden complete absence would only draw unwanted attention. I'll go alone, he insisted when Alara proposed accompanying him. You're still being actively searched for. The family quarters offer protection through obscurity, but outside, they'll be watching. And if they're watching you too, Alara challenged. Then better just me than all of us, Cale replied firmly. If something happens, you know the emergency protocols we discussed. Take Lyra and use the maintenance access routes to reach Docking Bay 12. My contact there will honor the arrangement regardless. Alara clearly disliked the plan, but recognized its logic. 4 hours, she conceded. If you're not back in 4 hours, we implement the contingency. Cale nodded and knelt to Lyra's level. The child had been unusually quiet that morning, clearly sensing the tension between the adults. I'll be back soon, he promised her. While I'm gone, maybe you can draw me a map of the stars you counted last night? Lyra's face brightened slightly. All 59 of them. Every single one, Cale confirmed solemnly. It's important scientific work, you know. This coaxed a small smile from the child. I'll make it very accurate. The simple exchange left Cale feeling unexpectedly emotional as he headed out. He'd been alone for so long that even basic human connections now affected him profoundly. The journey to his workshop was uneventful, though Cale maintained constant vigilance, taking indirect routes and frequently checking for surveillance. Years of paranoia had honed these skills to instinct. His workshop appeared undisturbed, the security system reporting no breach attempts. Nevertheless, Cale proceeded cautiously, sweeping for surveillance devices before beginning to gather the items he needed. It was while collecting a specialized toolkit that he heard the soft chime of an incoming communication on his secure terminal, a line known only to a handful of trusted contacts. Wary but curious, Cale accepted the transmission. The screen flickered to life, revealing the weather-beaten face of Tasman, his contact in Xylo's Port Authority and one of the few people Cale might cautiously call an ally. You've stirred quite the hornet's nest, mechanic, Tasman greeted without preamble. Got 3 different unofficial inquiries about your new family status in the last 12 hours. Cale maintained a neutral expression. News travels fast, especially when people are paying for it, Tasman replied dryly. Corporate types, asking very specific questions. Seems they're particularly interested in your sudden marriage to a woman nobody's seen before. My personal life is my business, Kale said stiffly. Tasman snorted. Sure it is. Which is why I've been conveniently failing to retrieve those records they're so keen on. But listen, Kale, whatever you're involved in, it's big. They're offering substantial incentives for information. What have you told them? Nothing useful, Tasman assured him. You saved my hide during that containment breach 2 years back. I haven't forgotten. But you should know, they've got official authorization coming through within 48 hours. Corporate inspection warrant. Once that clears, I can't block their access to residential records. Kale's mind raced. Understood. Thanks for the warning. Tasman nodded briskly. Watch your back, mechanic. And whatever you're planning, do it fast. The transmission ended, leaving Kale staring at a blank screen. 2 days. They had 2 days before Omnicorp could legally force entry to their quarters and face match Ilera and Lyra against their database. Kale gathered his equipment with new urgency. Their timetable had just accelerated dramatically. Returning to the family quarters, Kale found Ilera and Lyra exactly as he'd left them. Lyra diligently working on her star map, Ilera monitoring security feeds from a portable scanner she must have carried in her limited belongings. We have a problem, Kale announced without preamble, explaining Tasman's warning. Ilera absorbed the information with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to setbacks. 48 hours to evacuation, then less, Kale corrected. We should be gone well before the authorization clears. 36 hours maximum. The salvage crew option? Kale shook his head. Next salvage run isn't for 5 days. We'll need another way. He hesitated, then voiced the plan that had been forming on his return journey. There's a supply transport scheduled for maintenance bay restock tomorrow. Minimal security, automated systems. I helped design the loading protocols years ago. Could we access it? With the right credentials, Kale confirmed, which I can fabricate given enough time. Ilera studied him closely. This is no longer just about temporary shelter, is it? You're coming with us. The realization hit Kale that she was right. Somewhere in the past 24 hours, his perspective had shifted. The thought of returning to his solitary existence after they left now seemed hollow, purposeless. If you'll have me, he said quietly. Something flickered in Ilera's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the recognition of a significant boundary crossed. It's dangerous. Omnicorp will never stop hunting us. They've never stopped hunting me either, Kale replied. I just stopped running. He glanced at Lyra, still absorbed in her drawing. Maybe it's time to start again. Properly this time. Ilera's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then we'd better get to work. The next 30 hours passed in a blur of careful preparation. Kale worked tirelessly to create the counterfeit access credentials they would need, while Ilera organized their limited belongings and prepared Lyra for another upheaval. To her credit, the child accepted the news with the resilience of one who had never known true stability. Her only request was to bring her star map, now completed with meticulous care. When Kale assured her it would travel with them, her relieved smile had nearly broken his heart. They worked in shifts, always keeping watch, using the family quarters advanced communications system to monitor station activity for any sign their plan had been discovered. Kale made brief, strategic appearances in public areas, maintaining his regular repair business schedule to avoid arousing suspicion. It was during one such appearance, just 6 hours before their planned departure, that Kale first noticed the surveillance. Nothing obvious. Omnicorp operatives were too professional for that, but subtle patterns in crowd movement, communications dead zones where there shouldn't be any, and the same faces appearing too frequently in different locations. They were being watched. Perhaps not directly connected yet, but definitely under observation. Kale completed his business with forced casualness, then took an intentionally complex route back to the family quarters, employing every counter-surveillance technique he knew. By the time he arrived, he was reasonably certain he'd lost any potential tail, but the encounter left him deeply unsettled. They're closing in, he informed Ilera grimly. We need to move up our timeline. She nodded, already gathering their emergency packs. How soon? Next transport cycle. 2 hours. Alara's expression tightened, but she didn't argue. I'll prepare, Lyra. As they made final preparations, the family quarters suddenly plunged into darkness, emergency lights casting eerie red shadows across the walls. A moment later, the station-wide alert system activated. Attention all residents. Security Protocol 7 has been initiated in sections 12 through 17. Please remain in your quarters until all clear is issued. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Kale exchanged an alarmed glance with Alara. Section 15, precisely where their quarters were located. It's not a coincidence, she said, voicing what they both knew. They're isolating this section to search it thoroughly. Change tactics, Kale agreed grimly. They must suspect we're planning to leave. A security lockdown meant sealed access points, increased automated surveillance, and security personnel with authorization to conduct door-to-door searches. Lyra appeared from the sleeping area, clutching her star map and the ever-present blue cube. Her eyes were wide, but remarkably calm. They found us again. It wasn't a question. Kale knelt before her, placing his hands gently on her small shoulders. Yes, but we're ready for them. Remember the secret routes we practiced? Lyra nodded solemnly. Maintenance shaft C to junction 14, then service corridor to emergency airlock 9. That's right, Kale confirmed, impressed by her perfect recall. You stick close to your mother. I'll create a diversion to draw them away from your path. No, Alara interrupted sharply. We stay together. That was the plan. Plans change, Kale replied. This lockdown changes everything. They'll have teams at every major junction. Our only chance is to split their focus. Alara shook her head, a fierce protectiveness in her eyes. I won't lose you right after finding you. This simple declaration, delivered with such intensity, momentarily robbed Kale of words. In their brief time together, something had formed between them, a connection beyond their pragmatic arrangement, beyond even their shared enemy. You won't lose me, he promised, his voice rougher than intended. I'll meet you at the transport, but someone needs to trigger the secondary security alerts to pull forces away from your escape route. Alara clearly wanted to argue further, but her tactical mind recognized the logic. How long will it take you? 20 minutes. If I'm not at the rendezvous by then, don't wait. The access codes will work without me. Alara's expression hardened. 25 minutes. Not a second less. Kale nodded, accepting the compromise. Then, moved by an impulse he didn't fully understand, he pulled both Alara and Lyra into a brief embrace. Family stays together, he said softly. I'll be there. The corridor outside their quarters was bathed in the same ominous red emergency lighting when they cautiously emerged. Distant alarms and the methodical thud of security teams moving through adjacent sections created an apocalyptic backdrop to their escape attempt. At the first junction, they paused for a final confirmation of their plan. Remember, Kale instructed, no matter what happens, keep moving. The transport leaves in 52 minutes with or without passengers. Alara nodded tightly, then surprised him by pulling him into a fierce kiss, brief but filled with unspoken emotions. 25 minutes, she reminded him as they separated. Not a second less. Lyra hugged his legs. Be careful, just Kale. Then they were gone, disappearing into the maintenance access point that would take them on the first leg of their escape route. Kale allowed himself exactly 3 seconds to process what had just happened. The kiss, the child's embrace, the bewildering rush of feelings they evoked, before forcing his mind back to the task at hand. Moving with purpose, he headed in the opposite direction, toward the station's environmental control nexus. If his memory of Xylos' systems remained accurate, a cascading failure in the atmospheric regulation subsystems would trigger exactly the kind of all-hands emergency that would divert security from the cargo area. It took him 12 precious minutes to reach the control room, another 3 to bypass the basic security, and 30 seconds to implement the carefully calibrated sabotage that would cause alarming but ultimately harmless fluctuations in multiple sectors. As he finished, the door behind him hissed open. Step away from the console. Engineer Kalen commanded a cold, precise voice. Kale turned slowly to face a tall, immaculately dressed woman flanked by two armed security personnel. Her crisp uniform bore Omnicorp's distinctive insignia, but it was her eyes that captured Kale's attention, unnaturally green, clearly augmented with the latest battlefield assessment technology. Commander Thorne, Kale acknowledged, recognizing the infamous head of Omnicorp's recovery operations from security briefings years ago. You're a long way from corporate headquarters. Thorne's perfectly composed features betrayed no emotion. Some assets warrant personal attention. I must admit, your involvement was an unexpected complication, Engineer Kalen. We believed you had removed yourself from the equation years ago. Sorry to disappoint, Kale replied, surreptitiously pressing the final command sequence behind his back. Throughout the station, warning klaxons began to sound as atmospheric pressure warnings activated in multiple sections. Thorne's augmented eyes narrowed fractionally. A diversion. Clever, but ultimately futile. My teams are already converging on all transport options. Subject Lyra and the research data will be secured within the hour. Her name is Lyra, Kale corrected, anger rising at the clinical designation. She's a child, not a subject. She is corporate property, Thorne stated flatly. As is the genetic research data her mother stole. You've involved yourself in industrial espionage and asset theft of the highest order, Engineer Kalen. Even your tenuous legal arrangement won't protect you this time. Kale's mind raced, calculating odds, possibilities. He needed to keep Thorne talking to give Alara and Lyra more time. You're still upset about that prototype malfunction, aren't you? The one that killed my family. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Thorne's face. That incident was regrettable, but unrelated to current operations. Was it? Kale pressed, sudden clarity emerging. Or was it the first test of the very genetic modifications you later perfected in Lyra? Rapid cellular regeneration, radiation resistance. Qualities that would make the perfect mining drone operator. Qualities my family died testing. Thorne's expression confirmed his suspicion without words. You always were too perceptive for your own good, Engineer Kalen. Alara made the same connections eventually. It's why she ran with the child and the research data. Rage and grief threatened to overwhelm Kale. All these years, he'd blamed himself for not preventing the accident, for not being more insistent about the safety concerns. But it had never been just a technical malfunction. It had been deliberate human experimentation. Before he could respond, the station shuddered violently as his sabotage triggered secondary systems failures. Emergency bulkheads slammed down throughout the affected sections, sirens blaring as evacuation protocols activated. In that moment of distraction, Kale lunged forward, driving his shoulder into one of the security guards. The impact sent them both crashing into Thorne, creating momentary chaos. Kale didn't waste the opportunity. He sprinted for the secondary exit, a maintenance hatch that connected to the station's service tunnels. Behind him, he heard Thorne barking orders, the distinctive whine of weapons powering up. Pain exploded across his left side as one of the guards got off a shot. The impact sent him stumbling, but adrenaline kept him moving. He slammed through the hatch, sealing it behind him, and plunged into the dim confines of the service tunnel. The wound burned like fire, but a quick assessment as he ran confirmed it was superficial, cauterized by the energy weapon, painful but not immediately life-threatening. He could still make the rendezvous if he hurried. The station continued to shudder around him as environmental systems struggled to compensate for his sabotage. Emergency crews would be scrambling, security divided between the multiple alerts and their primary mission of finding Alara and Lyra. When Kale finally emerged near the transport bay, 19 minutes had elapsed since they'd separated. His side throbbed mercilessly, but the knowledge that he'd beaten his own deadline gave him renewed energy. The cargo loading area was automated, operating despite the emergency protocols thanks to its critical supply status. Moving carefully to avoid the scanning systems, Kale made his way to the prearranged meeting point, a maintenance alcove with a direct line of sight to the transport's secondary cargo hold. No sign of Alara or Lyra. 22 minutes. Kale forced himself to remain calm. They could have encountered delays, been forced to take an alternate route. His diversion had worked. He could see confusion among the security personnel as they tried to respond to multiple emergencies simultaneously. 23 minutes. Movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting near one of the cargo containers. Then another. Security teams closing in, moving with the coordinated precision that marked Omnicorp's elite operatives. They knew. Somehow, they knew about the transport plan. Kale's heart sank as the realization hit him. Their rendezvous had been compromised. If Alara followed their plan exactly, she and Lyra would be walking directly into a trap. 24 minutes. He had to warn them, had to find another way. But as he prepared to move, to search for them along their planned route, a small hand suddenly gripped his arm. "Just Kale," Lyra whispered, materializing from behind a stack of supply crates. "Mother said to find you. She's hurt." Relief and alarm warred within him as he followed Lyra to a concealed corner behind the loading equipment. There, partially hidden beneath a maintenance tarp, lay Alara. Her silver hair was matted with blood from a wound at her temple, and her breathing came in shallow, pained gasps. "Patrol. Intercepted us," she managed as Kale knelt beside her. "Had to. Take alternate route." "Don't talk," Kale urged, quickly assessing her injuries. The head wound looked worse than it probably was, but her labored breathing suggested internal damage. "We need to get you on that transport." Alara's violet eyes fixed on him with unwavering intensity. "They're watching the transport. We won't make it." "All three." "We will," Kale insisted, though he'd reached the same conclusion moments earlier. "I'll create another diversion." "No time," Alara said, her voice growing weaker. "Listen, Kale, take Lyra. Get her on that transport." "I'm not leaving you," Kale protested. Alara's hand clutched his with surprising strength. "You must." "For Lyra." Her gaze shifted to her daughter, who stood unnaturally still, watching the exchange with those two perceptive eyes. "You're her father now. In every way that matters." Lyra moved closer, her small face composed despite the tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "Mother, please come with us." "I'll try, Starlight," Alara promised, though they all knew it for the gentle lie it was. "But no matter what, you go with Kale. He'll keep you safe now." The transport's warning klaxon sounded. 15 minutes until departure. Kale looked between Alara and Lyra, anguish tearing at him. He couldn't leave Alara, but staying meant capture for all of them, especially Lyra. "The cube," Alara whispered, fumbling at her jacket. "Take it. Insurance." Kale helped her extract the blue cube that had never left Lyra's possession until now. "Alara, please. Our marriage wasn't just convenience," she interrupted, her voice fading. "Remember that. Whatever happens." Before Kale could respond, shouts erupted from the main cargo area. Security teams had begun a systematic sweep. "Go," Alara urged, pushing the cube into his hands. "Now." Lyra flung herself at her mother, hugging her fiercely. "I love you, Mother. Forever and always, Starlight," Alara whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "Now go be brave. I'll find you again. I promise." With tearing heart, Kale gathered Lyra into his arms and rose. "I'll come back for you," he vowed to Alara, as soon as Lyra's safely away. Alara's smile was tinged with sorrow and something else. A fierce pride, perhaps, or love in its purest form. "I know you will." Carrying Lyra, the blue cube secured in his pocket, Kale slipped away from their hiding place just as the security sweep reached the adjacent section. He felt the child trembling against him, her face buried in his shoulder, but she made no sound as they navigated the treacherous path toward the transport's service access panel. Using the counterfeit credentials he'd prepared, Kale accessed the automated cargo sorting system. With Lyra safely inside the narrow maintenance shaft, he programmed a specialized container to bypass the standard scanning protocols, a vulnerability he'd identified years ago and never reported. "Lyra, listen carefully," he whispered as the container moved into position. You'll be inside this transport container for about 20 minutes. It's airtight, but there's an emergency oxygen supply if you need it. He showed her the simple mechanism. Stay absolutely silent until you feel the transport leave station gravity. Then, and only then, use this. He pressed a small transmitter into her hand. It will alert me to your exact location, so I can come find you after I get your mother. Lyra looked at the transmitter, then back at Kale, her eyes far too knowing for a child her age. You're not coming, are you? You're going back for mother. Kale hesitated, then decided truth was the only gift he could offer her now. I'm going to try to save her. Then I'll come for you, I promise. To his surprise, Lyra nodded with solemn understanding. She would do the same for you. Her small hand touched his cheek. Find her, just Kale. Then find me. With a heart threatening to shatter, Kale helped Lyra into the container, ensuring she was as comfortable as possible in the confined space. Remember, absolute silence until you feel the gravity shift. I know, she assured him. I've hidden in smaller spaces before. The simple statement, delivered with such matter-of-fact acceptance, reinforced Kale's determination. This child deserved better than a life of hiding in cargo containers. I'll find you, he promised again as he sealed the container. Both of us will. With Lyra secured, Kale initiated the automated sequence that would deliver the container to the transport's secondary hold, bypassing the enhanced security checks. Then, ignoring the burning pain in his side, he turned back toward where he'd left Alara. He made it halfway when the sound of weapons fire erupted from the direction of their hiding place. Heart pounding, Kale increased his pace, using every bit of cover available. When he finally reached the maintenance tarp, Alara was gone. Only a smear of blood remained as evidence she'd ever been there. But nearby, the bodies of 2 security personnel lay crumpled on the deck. Despite her injuries, Alara had clearly not gone quietly. New shouting drew Kale's attention to the main cargo bay. Through the chaos of emergency responders and security teams, he caught a glimpse of silver hair. Alara being dragged toward a secure transport, Commander Thorne herself supervising the operation with cold efficiency. Kale's first instinct was to charge forward, to attempt a desperate rescue despite the overwhelming odds. But as the transport carrying Lyra began its final departure sequence, clarity pierced his anguish. Alara had sacrificed herself to ensure Lyra's escape. Throwing his life away in a futile rescue attempt would render that sacrifice meaningless. The true battle, the one that mattered, was ensuring Lyra remained free. And to do that, he needed to survive, to follow the transport, to honor his promise to both mother and daughter. With the hardest decision of his life, Kale turned away from Alara and moved swiftly toward the small maintenance vessel he'd prepared as his own escape route. It wasn't much, barely more than a glorified spacesuit with propulsion, but it would allow him to track the transport carrying Lyra to its destination. As he prepared for launch, a station-wide broadcast activated. Commander Thorne's cold voice echoed throughout Xylos. Attention, all personnel. The security incident has been contained. Subject E has been secured. Repeat, Subject E has been secured. All units are now directed to locate and apprehend Engineer Kalen and Subject L. Maximum force authorized. They didn't know Lyra had escaped. They still thought she was with him. A grim smile touched Kale's lips as he sealed his maintenance vessel and initiated the launch sequence. Let them chase him. Every second they focused on him was another second Lyra moved further from their grasp. As a small vessel detached from Xylos Station, Kale caught one final glimpse of the imposing structure that had been his prison and refuge for 4 long years. Somewhere within its metal confines, Alara was being held, injured, captured, but alive. I'll come back for you, he promised again, though she couldn't hear him. For both of you. The transport ship carrying Lyra had already vanished into the starfield, bound for distant settlements beyond Omnicorp's immediate reach. With determination burning brighter than the pain in his side, Kale programmed his vessel to follow its ion trail. Behind him, Xylos Station receded into the vastness of space, its lights gradually dimming until it was just another star in the endless expanse. Before him lay uncertainty danger, and the overwhelming responsibility of protecting a child who was now, in every way that mattered, his daughter. Yet for the first time since losing his family, Cale felt something beyond grief and guilt. Purpose, connection, perhaps even hope. The blue cube Alara had entrusted to him pulsed softly in his pocket, the key to Omnicorp's darkest secrets and, potentially, to Alara's freedom. Lyra's transmitter remained silent, evidence that she was following his instructions precisely, biding her time until safety. Whatever came next, whatever obstacles Omnicorp placed in their path, Cale knew with absolute certainty that he would face them. For Lyra, for Alara, and for the chance to forge something new from the fragments of their broken lives. As his vessel accelerated into the void, following the faint trail of the transport carrying his new daughter to an unknown future, Cale allowed himself a moment to contemplate the strange, unexpected turn his life had taken. 3 days ago, he'd been a solitary mechanic, deliberately isolated from human connection, suffocating under the weight of his past. Now he was a husband and father, hurtling through space toward an uncertain destiny, carrying the weight of promises that mattered more than his own life. Whatever the future held, Cale knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never return to the emptiness of before. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices were required, he would find a way to reunite his new family and give Lyra the future her mother had fought so desperately to secure. Somewhere in the vastness ahead, a new dawn waited. Not just for Lyra, but for him as well. This time, he would not fail.